Welcome to the Sustainable Sheep Systems series webinar, which is funded by the Farm Advisory Service. Tonight, we bring you part 3 of the Consumer-Driven Sustainability series, where we'll be covering the alternative methods available to castrate and tail dock lambs, with a focus on improving animal welfare. So the Animal Welfare Committee have advised that legislation surrounding castration and tail docking should be amended by 2028. And this will most likely see a ban on the use of rubber rings without administration of pain relief. So the aim of tonight's webinar is to demonstrate the alternative methods currently available and highlight the benefits of them. We're going to look at the management aspect, labour, cost, and hopefully encourage viewers to consider adopting a new method to prioritise lamb welfare. And this is also very timely as we approach lambing season. So tonight we've got 4 excellent speakers to cover this hot topic. We have Marion McMillan, who is a Veterinary Investigation Officer with SRUC Veterinary Services based in the St Boswell's office. We've got Bobby Lennox from Shantron Farm at Alexandra, and he uses Numnuts, so he's going to talk us through the use of Numnuts. And we've got David MacTaggart from Hallrule Farm in the Borders, who's going to talk to us about Clipfitter. And then we've got James Hamilton from Aikengall Farm in Dunbar, who's going to talk about not using any method of tail docking or castration and letting lambs run entire. Now, before I pass over to Marion, I just want to highlight that the technical note on castration and tail docking of lambs has been updated and is available on the FAS website. So I'd like to welcome Marion, who's going to take us through the first part of this evening's webinar.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Just want to talk to you a little bit about tail docking and castration, where we are at the moment and where we need to be in the future. So where are we right now? It's very much a routine part of life on most farms. By far the most common method used is the rubber ring. We know it's painful. We know that the lambs do kick and struggle after they've had a rubber ring applied. So we want to look at the alternatives, how to be more welfare friendly for these wee lambs and get the best out of them. So the Farm Animal Welfare Committee in 1994 and 2008 said that farmers should really think about whether it was necessary to tail and castrate. But when it came to the 2022 report, it showed that really nothing had changed in the last few years. And as things are currently carried out, it does cause a welfare harm. We know these lambs suffer pain when they get the rubber ring applied. So the report from the Animal Welfare Council stated that the current castration and tail docking practices can no longer be justified and that it's time to move to better practices. But it's not just as simple as a change in law or just a simple change in practice. So at the moment, this is the legislation as things currently stand in Scotland. Now, the rules in England, Wales are different. So anybody who's listening south of the border, please make sure that you follow the law as it applies in your country. But as things stand at the moment, animals less than 7 days of age, you can use rubber rings, you can use bordizzos or clip fitters. Beyond 7 days of age, the rules change a bit. You're not allowed to use a rubber ring without local anaesthetic being applied. So this is where the Numnuts applicates in, because that administers the local anaesthetic at the same time as the rubber rings applied. And the clip fitter and bordizzo remains legal up to 3 months of age. And then with tail docking, the rules are very, very similar, but with the addition that you can use a hot tailing iron as long as it cuts and cauterizes at the same time. And you can also use that up to 3 months of age. Anybody who's using a knife for castration or tailing, that is only legal if a vet does a surgical castration. Farmers can't use any blades. So recommendations for going forward is that castration should only be permitted on ram lambs that are not going to be slaughtered before puberty. So that means anybody who's got early lambing flocks and quick finishing lambs, these really shouldn't be castrated at all. And it's really important that when you are castrating, that you make sure you don't do it until the lambs have fully bonded with their mum and had a really good belly full of colostrum. We know that anything that stops the colostrum being taken in at an early age is really, really detrimental to their health. So it's absolutely essential you don't do it too quickly. It should be routine that local anaesthetic and pain relief should be provided where the procedure is likely to be painful. And that's even if it's less than 7 days of age, because these little lambs do feel pain. And castration should always be carried out in accordance with the law. And just to note that anything over 3 months, it has to be a vet that does it. And in reality, there shouldn't really be a need to be castrating lambs beyond 3 months of age. And with regards to tail docking, it should only be carried out if there would be a welfare problem due to dirty tails and fly strike. This is something that we can look at more closely, because having really good worm control and keeping the lambs clean will also reduce the risk of fly strike and is likely to reduce the need for tail docking. And again, as with the castration, anaesthesia and pain relief should be routinely provided. And again, it should be carried out in accordance with the law. So these were some studies carried out by SRUC, and it was looking at the pain responses of the lambs to tail docking initially. So on this graph, you can see that the blue line, as shown, is lambs that are tail docked with a rubber ring only. And these are lambs that are 3 to 5 days of age, so it was legal to just use a rubber ring. And the graph up the left is an indication of pain responses shown. So you can see that from 10 minutes, the pain that these lambs are showing is increasing over time. And that sort of 10 to 30 minutes post-application is where the lambs were most painful. The black line that you can see along the bottom was lambs that were picked up, handled, but didn't get tail docked. So they shouldn't have experienced pain, but they might be a little bit stressed by handling. And you can see how closely the Numnuts response followed those just handled lambs. They weren't really showing much in the way of pain response at all. So you can see that the local anaesthetic in the tail did have a dramatic effect on the pain that these lambs were showing. And then when we move forward to the castration study, the results were not as impressive. You can see, again, the black line along the bottom is the lambs that were just handled, but the castration with rubber rings and the castration with Numnuts follow quite a similar pattern. And this one's quite difficult to interpret in a way, because the lambs only have a limited way to express pain. So they will stamp their feet, they'll twitch their tail, they'll roll over. What we can't ask these lambs is what degree of pain they're feeling. So we don't know if their pain scores 5 out of 10, 10 out of 10. We do have to assume that with local anaesthetic on board, that they will be more comfortable than the lambs with no local anaesthetic on board. But the behaviour responses don't really illustrate that terribly well. And then when the combination was carried out, that lambs were both castrated and tail docked, you can see that the red line for Numnuts does show a better pain profile than when the rubber rings were used alone. And from the previous two graphs, we would have to assume that a lot of that is the fact that they're not feeling as much pain from the tail docking. And then if we look at the Clipfitter study, this is the clip being applied in the picture on the right. So in this graph, the highest pain response was in lambs that only had the rubber ring applied. And then the next line down was lambs that were castrated with a rubber ring, but they also received local anaesthetic and a pain-killing injection. So they were more comfortable rubber rings only, but they were still showing quite significant discomfort. And then when you look at the two lines that are CE, the Clipfitter used to be known as Clampese. So the red line is castration using a Clipfitter. So you can see that there's very little pain response showed by these lambs at all. And the yellow line was tail docking with the Clipfitter. And again, these lambs, they're showing some pain just at the very beginning of the study. And that's understandable, because when you apply these clamps, they will be initially painful. The reason that these devices are considered more comfortable for the lambs is that when the clamp is applied, the nerve is severed rather than crushed. So you do get initial pain, but then the pain eases off much more rapidly. And we again have a handled only line, which is the green line. And you can see in a lot of ways, the lambs very closely follow the handled line when they're treated with the Clipfitter. So when we looked at the study, the rubber rings to castrate lambs less than 7 days of age showed the greatest pain response of any of the methods used. There was another study looking at older lambs, but obviously due to the legal situation, we couldn't use the exact same method in the older lambs. They had to have local anaesthetic and pain relief. It was noted that with the older lambs, the lambs did show behavioural pain responses, but it was significantly less than the younger lambs that had the rubber rings applied. And in both ages, the lambs that were tailed with the Clipfitter had a similar pain response to lambs that were tail docked with rubber rings and given pain relief. But it should be noted, with Clipfitter, they didn't receive any medication at all. It was only the clip that was applied. So this severing of the nerve does seem to have quite a dramatic effect on the pain. So the study supported the use of Clipfitter as a method, and that's why it was brought into Scottish legislation that you can use Clipfitter up to 12 weeks of age. Now, correct application of this is absolutely essential. So the picture on the left is the clip being applied correctly across the scrotum. The picture on the right, sadly, is a lamb that ended up in the post-mortem room after it had Clipfitter applied. And you can see that the clip has been applied at 90 degrees to where it should be. And the end of the clip has actually caught the penis and it has blocked the urethra so the lamb couldn't pass urine. And sadly, this wee lamb died with a ruptured bladder as a result of that. So we just need to highlight that training is absolutely essential with this product, and applying it correctly means it's a safe and effective means of castration and causes improved welfare compared to rubber ring. Obviously, with lots of other things, including rubber rings, if you get it wrong, then that can have consequences. So just to highlight that it is really important to get that orientation correct. Okay, so the Animal Welfare Committee came up with the recommendations that by 2028, there should be amended legislation, and it's regarding both tail docking and castration. And it'll take into account the current scientific knowledge and also the fact that we now have newer methods that are available, which are much more welfare friendly for the lambs. So this is likely to be a ban on the use of rubber rings without the use of anaesthetic and analgesics, and includes lambs less than 7 days of age. And this is because the old science that said that lambs that were less than 7 days of age didn't feel pain in the way that older lambs did has been completely debunked now. And in fact, if anything, these little lambs feel more pain than the older lambs. And we also should be thinking about the fact that these little lambs have got really quite a lot to do in their first week of life. They've got to get that maternal bond. They've got to learn how to follow their mums. They've got to keep warm. They've got to develop their immune systems to fight infection. So doing anything which hampers that is really detrimental to their ongoing welfare. So that's going to be a big shift. And also by 2028, we're looking that all farm assurance and retailer schemes will be aligned with the new legislation, and that if castration and tail docking needs to take place on farm, that will be written into your health plan by your vet with the justifications and the approved means that you're going to be carrying out the procedure. At the moment, we do have some current hold-ups. Major hold-up is people are not really adopting these new technologies fast enough. And also we do have an issue with lack of licensed painkillers in sheep. And that particularly applies to lambs that are less than 14 days old. We don't really have much data on how safe and effective these drugs are in these really young lambs. So we need to get the drug companies and government on board with getting really good data on what is the best pain method to control their pain, and also what the correct dosages are. And the major thing to highlight is by far the most welfare friendly option with castration is not to do it at all. And obviously that can't be done in all circumstances. There are places where having these lambs running forward into the next year are going to cause significant management problems. But if you are on a farm where it's feasible to get your lambs finished in a way before mating season and before they're going to cause a problem, then that is by far the best option.
Thanks very much, Marion. That was a really good whistle stop, but in-depth tour of the legislation and things that might be coming round the corner. Just one thing, obviously, we know that the legislation is going to change, and obviously that will follow through to farm assurance, etc. Have you got any opinions on supplier contracts, before this happens, so the likes of Marks and Spencer's, Tesco, whatever, are you aware of any of the suppliers looking at the welfare of using rubber rings at the moment, or?
I've not been involved with any negotiations with the suppliers. There's certainly some resistance from suppliers about accepting entire males once they have reached sexual maturity. So there are some concerns about ram taint in the older animals. And that's one reason why there is some acceptance that there are lambs out there that are going to have to be castrated.
Yeah.
But certainly these lambs that are going to be finished earlier, there is definitely a push to be using more welfare friendly methods.
Yeah, this is it. Just thinking about the consumer as well. Obviously it's something that the consumer, would be very distraught with seeing all these young lambs, in pain after having a rubber ring applied. So I just wondered if that was something, following on from marketing strategies, if that was something that any of the suppliers were sort of focusing on.
I think
Um,
these discussions are definitely coming,
yeah,
and yeah, I think there will be very soon a much bigger promotion on the welfare benefits
yeah.
and passing that through to the consumer.
It's going to be a balance, isn't it? Because there's very from your slides there's very compelling evidence for moving away from the rubber ring. But obviously, and I don't know if you agree with this, but it's probably why there has been a lack of uptake in alternative methods. That the rubber ring's something that farmers have used for generations and generations, and have got it's so embedded in their normal practice that it's just not something that they see as a priority to be looking at something different. Would you agree, or do you think there's a different reason for the lack of uptake?
I think habit is a major driving force
Yeah,
for people keeping to the same things. The other slight problem that we have is that these new technologies are obviously more expensive than the traditional rubber ring. So there are some cost hurdles to get over. And there's work being done at the moment with trials to see whether there can be benefits shown in terms of weight gain from the newer methods. So we're hoping that these will show that the lambs grow with less check, and then obviously the improved live weight gain will compensate the farmer probably several times over for any cost of
yeah, the
the
initial.
application.
Yeah, and this is it. There's also, well, we'll hear from our farmers shortly, but there's also the reduction in mismothering as well. I see that as a big benefit when the lambs aren't lying kicking. I see that as one of the biggest benefits. One thing we get a lot of farmers asking about, and this is sort of targeting Clipfitter here, but what about the plastic? A lot of farmers have concern about you never notice a rubber ring lying in a field, but what about these plastic clips? What's the
Yeah,
sort of independent advice from that aspect?
that is definitely a concern that the farmers have, and I've spoken to farmers, and yes, it's definitely something they are worried about. The newer clips are bioplastic, so they contain wood, but there is still a plastic component to them, so they will take time to biodegrade, and I don't know exactly how long that takes.
It could be a job for the kids in the summer holidays, couldn't it? Send them round the
Send them
fields
around and pick them up.
picking them up. A prize for who collects the most. No, thank you, Marion. That's been a really, really good presentation and insight into what's coming round the corner. So thanks very much, Marion, and we'll just move on to hear from our farmers now and hear about what they're doing. Now, I would like to introduce Bobby Lennox from Shantron Farm, who is going to cover the use of Numnuts within his system.
Right, I'm Bobby Lennox. I farm at Shantron and Shimore Farms on the west side of Lomond, where the first of the high hills as you move up the A82 road that you come to when you're heading north. We're farming round about 1,100 blackface ewes on the hill at the moment, and we've been tenants on the farm since 1750, so we've been around for a while. I first got involved with Numnuts probably 7 or 8 years ago. It was at the Highland Show. I was walking by the Morton stand and I saw this demonstration of one of the prototypes of Numnuts there, and got speaking to them, and then they approached me, would I be willing to try it on the farm and practice? And I was quite keen to do that because I'd always been trying to get away from rings. I'd been involved with a Ritchie nipper, and I used the Ritchie nipper for castration for a long number of years, till the actual nipper itself got to the point it was too loose and it wasn't doing the job, and I had to go back to the rings, which I didn't like, because you get the effect of the lambs. They're whether lambs are just away lying down for half a day after they've been done. You get mismothering and all the problems that you can get with rubber rings. And I was wanting to get away from that, and this looked like something that was worth looking at and exploring. And basically what came out, the Numnuts folk come out to the farm at marking time with initially several different sort of variations of the prototypes that they were planning to build, to see what I thought about them. How did they work? How did they use? Were they easy to use? What was wrong with them? And over a couple of years, they finally got to their final model, which is the one that you will have seen, which looks like that. Although most folks think it's a bit cumbersome, I much prefer it for putting on rings than the traditional applicator. It's much easier to do. It just seems natural. One big advantage it has with it is when you open it out, I've got arthritis in my fingers, but when you open up, there's an over-center effect in here. That means that once you've got it open, it takes no strength at all to hold it open. Well, the old illustrators, you are getting harder and harder to hold it open to use. But this is what they finally ended up with. This is the model that was marketed in the UK. In Australia and New Zealand, where it's been used and has been available commercially for 4 or 5 years now, they have a different system. Their bottles come with this attachment on it. You just put the bottle onto the gun there, but the licensing for using anaesthetics in the UK is much harder, so they're just marketing it with a holder, and you just buy a bottle of anaesthetic off your vet, and that bottle just squeezes on very simply like that, sits in there, and you take it out as easy as that. Now, I've been using this, and we did a lot of trial work with different sheep we were using, comparing it against, we'd do 20 sheep, we'd use the Numnuts, we'd use 20 sheep, we'd use rubber rings traditionally, marked lambs separately, and we watched them in the yards and very, very stand out straight away. The ones that have been done with the Numnuts are up walking around, neither up nor down. Well, the ones that have been castrated or tailed, they were all lying down, huddled round the outside of the yards, not happy at all. And, when you put them back to the field, they're the ones you've got to go back around later in the afternoon and make sure they're all mothered up and sorted. Well, the ones that were done with the Numnuts system, nothing was wrong. They're all perfectly mothered, and just an ordinary day out in the field with the lambs. So very quickly realised that it was right. We played around for a couple of years with getting the dose rates for the anaesthetic right. We found they'd started at one level, and I found I could work away at a much lower, because we were doing blackie lambs or smaller. I'm marking it at about lambs. Some of the youngest lambs will only be 2 or 3 days old. The oldest ones are 3 weeks, 4 weeks old. So quite a variation in age, because we start marking just towards the end of the first round of the lambs, or at the end of the sort of 17 days we start marking. And what we really basically found was that when we first started doing the trial work, the anaesthetic dose was too big for blackie lambs in the tail, and one or two of the lambs almost looked like sway back for about an hour or so till anaesthetic weared off. A bit an epidural effect. So we halved the dose rate on that, and that works fine. And I tried it for castration as well the following year, and compared two different dose rates, and I couldn't pick out which lambs went under the lower dose rate compared to the higher dose rate. So I moved the dose rate, and they've now altered the dose rates to the lower rate, and it seems to work fine. But it's a very simple process. You get lambs in. It is easier if you've got an automatic holder for holding rings. You can just go up with that, click a ring in and pull it down with one hand. If not, you just put it on as normal. It opens out, you release it. And the way it works is, if I can get this into the camera, when you push this plunger down, it's a two-stage. The first half pushes the needle in. You see the needle coming out there. And then the second push actually injects the anesthetic in and automatically puts it in the right place, either in the testicles or on the tail. So no problem. And because the needle shoots back inside, you've not any danger of artificially dragging yourself accidentally on it. I think that's really all I've got to say about it. I wouldn't go back now to doing anything else. And even if we weren't using an anesthetic or anything like that, I would still use that gun for putting on rings. It's just so much easier to use than the traditional illustrator. I just went and looked up my invoice last year. The anesthetic that I get from my vet is Procomedor Duo, and it works out last year was £10.50 per 100 ml bottle, and that does 75 lambs on average if you're half wethers and half ewe lambs. So it's basically one bottle to 75 lambs. So that worked out at 14 pence per lamb. And the rubber rings was £11 for 500 rings. So that worked out at 3p per ring, or per lamb, sorry. So 17 pence per lamb is the cost for the ring and the anaesthetic. Now, it depends what your vet's going to charge you for your anaesthetic, but that's what my vet's charged me. If you cost out your time to go for a couple of hours going around the fields mothering them up afterwards, if you use the traditional rubber rings.
So next we're going to go to David and Sarah, who are using Clipfitter. Are you there, guys?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, we're farming down in the Scottish borders, farming 1,550 acres, of which there'd be 900 acres of grass, along with a couple of hundred acres of cereals, and quite a lot in environmental schemes as well. We used to have suckler cows, and now just sold those and moving on to doing some Wagyu cattle, as well as 300 breeding red deer hinds. The sheep system comprises of 1,300 breeding Romney ewes, all lambing outside towards the end of April. I started using the Clipfitter when it first came out in the trials in 2018. It was the first year I used it, and it was at that point it was just meant to be for actual castration. But I just said to Brian that we needed one tool for both jobs. So I started putting them on the tails as well. That first year, it was just a small batch. It was quite successful. But the main thing that we really noticed was the fact that when the lambs were castrated and tailed, that they actually mothered up straight away. I then decided to try an experiment and just see what happened when we actually put rings onto the tails of the females. And that actually gave me quite an insight that actually I thought it was always the boys lying down wriggling. But it was actually the girls every bit as much pain as the boys, which certainly made me kind of think. So based over a number of years and various versions of pliers and stuff from Brian, we started doing bigger batches out in the fields, and probably 2 years ago, we would actually use the Clipfitter on every lamb on the place. We just find that basically for our system, the speed that they can get up and move on and mother up is just brilliant. Do you want to take it on, Sarah?
Yeah, so I am the lucky person that gets to use them on the, so we use a tailing chute, and I'm kind of halfway down the chute and then doing the balls, and then someone at the bottom doing the tails. And this is one set of pliers. So these are the double pliers, and then you've also got the single. These are the MIDI ones that we've got at the minute. I personally, to start with, was using the single, and Brian was desperate for me to get onto the double because they were the ones that he designed, and I was like, no, not that keen on them. And then I started doing a few, and I was like, actually, he's right, they are much better, because I'm left-handed and extremely cat-handed, so everything to me always seems really awkward. But these, just as we've developed them, we find them so easy. I reckon they're every bit as quick as ringing when they're in the tailing chute. And I just flit. So if you imagine the lambs coming down here, I bring them back towards me, pick up the balls in the sack, a little twist, let it go, click it down, and then they're away. And you literally, every so often they have a little swarm, but then they're straight out and absolutely fine. So yes. We used to do, so we just like set up prattly pens, and we used to do kind of 2 or 3 lots and then move on to the next one. And now we're finding that we can do about 6 lots out of one setup because we can just move them so much quicker. So for us, it's definitely, we're now tailing and stuff a hell of a lot quicker than what we ever used to. Cost-wise, for the MIDI ones, for the biodegradable clips, they are working out at about 37p a clip. And I would say I've had a lot of people say, oh, do you not, like, I hate the thought of driving around and finding clips lying around. And bar the odd couple at gateways, we hardly see them. So I think it's definitely, I would say when you're putting them on the balls, you definitely have to go east to west, not north to south. And we've got a little actually invention that David came up with on the chute that sits, it's just a bit of alkathene pipe that sits through the runners that then lifts their hips up against the bars. So it just helps with any ones that are a little bit littler, it helps push their hips up to make it easier to get a hold of everything that you're meant to. So
I think that basic kind of very quick, simplistic way of for the Clipfitter.
Excellent, thank you. And you know, Sarah, you're saying that you use the chute. Just for people out there that are maybe, you know, catching lambs in fields or doing them in lambing pens in the shed before they go out, how do you think it would, you know, do you think it would be quite easy to work out with the chute, you know, just picking a lamb up in a pen and doing it?
Yeah, I think so. I've seen 2 different types. I've seen people using them just like between their legs, like what you used to, and it actually looks okay as well. And then I've seen other people sit them up on like a prattly gate, and then someone else is clipping them, and other people have put them in, what are the things called? We tried them.
Rotating cradles, and they've been working equally as well.
Good. Excellent. No, thank you for that. That's a good overview. And just probably one more question just while we're here. What about how important is getting the size right of the Clipfitter? Because obviously there's different sizes on the market, and I think there's biodegradable ones as well. What ones do you use?
We've now started using the biodegradable now that was to start off with they hadn't quite worked properly. They were kind of split, and this was going back a couple of years. And last year we just used biodegradable, and that's definitely seems to be working well.
Yep.
And I think from what I was hearing, I mean, I think Brian quoted a figure of something like about 3 trees to 1,000,000 clips. So if you're looking at sustainability, it's actually not bad either.
There's actually, I didn't show the actual clip. So this is a biodegradable one. And it's just got the two hooks on that side, not on that side, and then they just clip. So I can clip it together. So there's in, and then that's it. Out. And then it just looks like a bread clip.
I think a lot of farmers as well, a lot of the comments that, you know, sometimes come through speaking to farmers is that, you know, they look big and they look uncomfortable for a lamb. But, you know, there's been studies done at SRUC, which we won't go into all of these tonight. They were sort of presented in a lamb crop webinar, but we can send them out. But, you know, actually they didn't cause any extra pain or, you know, discomfort to the lambs at all.
We always were looking like when the lambs were running through, however many weeks later, we would often turn a few upside down and just see, was there any marks in on their groins or anything like that? And there's never been anything.
Nothing there at all. Excellent. Yeah. We'll pass over to James. James Hamilton, some of you may recognise from hosting Scotch Sheep in 2024. Also a cold, windy day like today. So James, I'll hand over to you as you don't use any method of tailing or castration in your early lambing flock. So we're going to the complete other end of the scale. So James, over to you.
Yeah, well, welcome along, and thank you for having me on tonight. No, a pleasure to talk to you about what we do. I won't bore you too much. You'll all know plenty from last year, roughly, of our farm setup here at Aikengall. And what I'm going to talk about is Nunraw, our early lambing flock, where we don't tail at all. We're on about 1,200 ewes there, mule ewes, all to Texel for terminal sire in an early lambing system. I would say that our sort of basic farming mantra has always been, where can we cut costs and labour out of the thing? So really, it started for economic reasons, to be very honest, and it just so happens that we've seen a massive benefit in the health and the welfare of the lambs. It fits well. The lambs hit the ground and they just motor. There's no check to them at all. You know, as Bobby and things were alluding to earlier, lambs lying around in the ground, and you know, historically you'd spend days, wouldn't you, catching and marking lambs at stress to man and beast, which has just been eliminated. And you know, we're lucky we lamb them all indoors, so we would be able to do it legally, so to speak. But anyways, but the evidence that I'll use is kind of like my presentation tonight. It's very anecdotal and a bit caveman, but we did do an experiment one year where we tailed and castrated the first 50 lambs out of the shed, and it was very interesting. They were the earliest born. But it was very interesting that none of them made the first draw of lambs away at the end of May. So there clearly is a check to them, and admittedly they did they caught up eventually. Trying to think what else there is I would say about it. We practice a clean grazing setup, and the lambs are pushed, so we get them all away. They're in low ground fields. There potentially could be a fly burden, but they are away before that comes, and they're weaned off the mothers and treated with a click zin in July for the sort of 20% that don't get away early. So we tend to get away without any problems, and because it's an early lambing flock, any uncastrated lambs tend to be away before October, before there are problems of lambs running about uncastrated. I can't think of much else I can add to that. It works very well. As I say, the lambs hit the ground and just go.
Thanks, James. And this is you. How many lambs would you say that you you running that system? Sorry, I was trying to do some
That,
technical
that, that
issues in the
system,
background.
there were just over 2,000 lambs in the
2000.
system. Yeah, there's about 70 to 80% will be away. Start of July,
Yeah.
and then yeah, the following ones will be away mostly in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks after that, after weaning.
And what growth rates are you sort of targeting with those lambs?
I mean, those lambs go and really motor, and it's quite
Yeah.
we got a good dry week in the summer, we do creep feed them as well,
Yeah.
to hit that early marketing, hit that premium product. But it's amazing the way the market's gone now. Maybe isn't so much that way, but those lambs can do, we can see them doing up to sort of over 400 grams a day.
Grams a day, right?
When they're going, when the conditions are right.
In your opinion, how can we justify carrying on using rings to castrate and tail lambs when we have these other more painless alternatives? What's your thoughts on that? How can the industry move forward?
I think from an animal welfare point of view, there's no doubt either whether it's Clipfitter or Numnuts or not castrating at all. It's the correct way when now that there are alternatives to the traditional methods of castration that was at the time. I think there's really not any excuse not to use a method that doesn't cause pain.
And can you see any downsides to using the Numnuts tool? Is there any, anything that you didn't foresee with the tool? Is there any downsides at all?
Oh, off the top of it, I can't think of any. It's never caused a problem. It took, 10, 15 minutes to get used to using it in holding it a different way from the other one. But apart from that, once you've done half a dozen lambs, you'll not look back.
Okay, so that's the Numnuts sales pitch. David, Sarah, same question to you on the Clipfitter side of things. What's your thoughts?
I think having been involved in the initial trials, I would certainly agree with Bobby that we can't look back now, because the pain we've been inflicting with rings has to stop, and that's including tails on female lambs, which was the one that really shocked me. Relative to downsides of the Clipfitter, I'm probably the lucky one. I've got Sarah to do all the fitting anyway.
So we all need a Sarah.
Maybe the only slight downside is it maybe does take a couple. For me, if I get on a roll of really good, easy ones to do, I find it just as quick. Loading it maybe takes a wee bit longer because instead of just one ring that you're putting on, you've got two, like you're getting a clip into either side. But if I get onto a good run, I don't think it's any slower. And then we save so much more time at the other end when we're then, for the way that we do it in our system, where everything's outside. So for us then moving fields to then get the next mob back in, it's been an absolute game changer.
Yeah, this is it. So although the labour's maybe a little bit longer and the cost maybe a little bit higher, there's definitely those other benefits. And I think the thing that people don't think about is the performance, the weight gain. They're not getting a setback, they're not looking back, they're not being mismothered. There's a lot more definitely benefits, to these things.
I think it's also wet years that actually don't have lambs that are rolling around in the wet grass for an hour.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, we've all had bother with rings flying off the pliers and then they're not perfect. That's not a perfect system either, is it?
I think I've almost been lucky as well because I didn't, I've only started working here and lambing the last kind of 5 years. So yes, we used the pliers a bit, but I've not been using them for the last 15 years. So I haven't had to get that out of my head and how easy they were.
Yeah. So I suppose on that subject, Sarah, there'll be a lot of younger farmers on here that they're probably the ones in the lambing shed doing the work, but have to convince maybe the generation above them to give something different a little try.
He's not too bad.
What would your advice be? What would your sales pitch be to this younger generation to get to get through to the level
Just
above.
don't lose your patience with it. Like, I think if you, a bit like what Bobby was saying, after you've done 10, 15 minutes of it and you get the hang of it and you find how it works for you, it honestly isn't that much different at all. And just have patience. And I don't have a lot of patience. So. And I managed.
And you've got there. Excellent, thank you. And James, finally to you, what's your thoughts on the future of the rubber ring?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when you hear the sort of three sort of case studies we've had tonight, it's you know, I mean, if you look at my system, I don't think it would work for everyone. I think there is a need to castrate, certainly if you're lambing a bit later, and you know, really based on what we've heard, it's almost indefensible to the consumer for us to cause any pain or suffering to the animals that we're caring for. Yeah, that's yeah.
Excellent. And that's the thing, you know, with a lot more sort of rural communities, and you know, people love going and looking at the lambs, and there's so many local community Facebook pages and things like that. And you know, you quite often see on those Facebook pages somebody posting, you know, there's a lamb lying in its side, you know, looks in pain and things like that. You know, it is definitely something that a lot of consumers are sort of looking at, and obviously it's definitely something that's high in the agenda for legislation going forward.